Today's video about a woman's pregnancy that wasn't supposed to exist. What happens when a lie so deep, so hidden, destroys the life you thought you knew? Betrayal, secrets, and a single confession spiral into a chain of events that no one saw coming. But the question is, who will survive the truth when it finally comes to light? Emma Carter stood barefoot on the cold bathroom tiles, the house still asleep around her. Dawn light slipped through the narrow window, pale and uncertain, like it was afraid to witness what she held in her trembling hand. The pregnancy test felt heavier than plastic should ever feel. 2 pink lines stared back at her, bright and undeniable. For a moment, Emma forgot how to breathe. Her reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar, eyes wide, lips parted, a woman suspended between fear and hope. She pressed a hand against her stomach, searching for something she couldn't yet feel, but desperately needed to believe was real. A baby, a reason, maybe even a second chance. Her marriage to Daniel Carter had not always been this quiet. Once, their home had been filled with laughter, late-night conversations, and careless touches that promised forever. But over the past year, silence had moved in like an unwanted guest. Daniel worked late. Emma ate dinner alone. Questions went unasked because the answers felt dangerous. Still, Emma clung to the idea that this child could fix what was broken. She imagined Daniel's face softening, his walls finally coming down. She rehearsed the moment again and again, whispering the words under her breath as if practicing for survival. "We're going to have a baby." Each time she said it, her voice shook less. She showered, dressed carefully, and waited until Daniel came into the kitchen. He looked tired, shadows carved deep beneath his eyes, his movements precise and distant. Emma noticed how he avoided her gaze, how even his coffee seemed more important than her presence. Her heart pounded as she slid the test across the table. Daniel stared at it without touching it. The seconds stretched unbearably long. Emma watched his face, waiting for surprise, joy, anything. Instead, his jaw tightened. His shoulders stiffened. When he finally looked up, there was no warmth in his eyes, only calculation. "What is this?" he asked, though they both knew the answer. "I'm pregnant," Emma said softly. She smiled, trying to bridge the gap between them. I thought this could be good for us." Daniel pushed the test away as if it burned him. He stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound made Emma flinch. He began pacing the room, rubbing his temples, breathing faster with every step. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. Emma laughed nervously. "Daniel, it's not complicated. I went to the pharmacy." "No," he interrupted, turning toward her with an intensity that made her stomach twist. "This is impossible." The word hung in the air, sharp and final. Emma felt the room tilt slightly, as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted. She opened her mouth to ask what he meant, but Daniel was already walking away, his footsteps heavy, controlled, rehearsed. Her mind raced through memories she didn't want to examine, moments she had buried under routine and denial, a late night, a comforting voice, a decision she had sworn meant nothing. Emma swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay seated, forcing calm into her shaking hands. From the doorway, he stopped and looked back at her, his expression unreadable. His voice dropped to a whisper that cut deeper than shouting ever could. "That child," he said slowly, "cannot be mine." Emma's smile collapsed as fear crept in, cold and unstoppable. She stared at the pregnancy test still lying on the table, the 2 pink lines suddenly feeling less like hope and more like a sentence waiting to be carried out. The truth was already breathing inside the room. The silence that followed Daniel's words settled deep into the walls of the house. Emma barely slept that night, lying awake beside a man who felt suddenly unfamiliar. Daniel faced the opposite wall, his breathing steady, controlled, as if nothing had changed. Emma studied the ceiling, replaying his voice again and again. Impossible. The word echoed louder than any scream. By morning, the space between them felt wider than the bed itself. Their marriage had not broken all at once. It had eroded slowly, quietly, like stone worn down by unseen water. Years earlier, Daniel had been attentive, thoughtful, present. He used to ask about her day, listen without checking his phone, touch her like she mattered. But work took more of him, then stress, then distance. Emma learned to stop asking questions. Daniel learned to stop offering answers. Silence became their shared language. Emma filled her loneliness with routine. She cooked meals Daniel barely touched, cleaned rooms no one noticed, and scrolled through her phone late into the night, craving connection without knowing where to find it. Daniel filled his with structure and control. He woke early, left on time, returned late. Conversations became transactional. Did you pay the bills? What's for dinner? Good night. Love was assumed, never spoken. There were moments Emma almost confessed everything. Late evenings when Daniel sat across from her, eyes tired, hands clenched around a glass he didn't finish. She sensed something heavy inside him, something he refused to release, but fear always stopped her. Fear of losing him, fear of becoming the villain in a story she still hoped could be rewritten. The pregnancy intensified everything. Emma watched Daniel closely, searching for cracks. He avoided her touch, her eyes, even the kitchen where the test still lay hidden in a drawer. She caught him staring into nothing, jaw tight, thoughts clearly elsewhere. When she asked if they should talk, he answered with silence. When she asked if he was okay, he said yes without looking at her. What Emma didn't know was that Daniel's silence was not empty. It was calculated. Beneath his calm exterior, suspicion grew like a spreading infection. Numbers replayed in his mind, dates, timeframes. Things that didn't align. Daniel prided himself on logic, on facts, on control, and this pregnancy shattered all three. 2 days later, Daniel made a decision without telling her. He scheduled an appointment during his lunch break, choosing a clinic far from their neighborhood. As he confirmed the time, his hands trembled slightly, betraying the certainty he projected. He told himself he needed proof, not accusations, truth, not emotion. Emma watched him leave that morning, sensing something had shifted but unable to name it. She stood alone in the doorway long after his car disappeared, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. The silence inside the house felt heavier than before, pressing down on her chest. Neither of them spoke that night. And neither of them understood that the quiet holding their marriage together was about to reveal a truth that would destroy it completely. Daniel sat alone in the clinic waiting room, surrounded by muted colors and the low hum of fluorescent lights. A television played a daytime program no one was watching. He checked his watch repeatedly, though time seemed stuck, thick and unmoving. The decision to come here had been made in silence, but now that he was here, it felt heavier than expected. When the nurse finally called his name, Daniel followed her down a narrow hallway, his footsteps measured, controlled. He answered questions automatically, his voice calm, almost detached. He had rehearsed this moment in his head, convincing himself it was nothing more than confirmation, a formality that would silence his doubts. The doctor didn't rush. He reviewed papers, adjusted his glasses, and spoke with the careful tone of someone used to delivering difficult news. Daniel listened, nodding occasionally, as medical terms filled the room: low count, none, motile, permanent, words Daniel never thought would apply to him. I'm sorry, the doctor said gently, based on these results, it's medically impossible for you to conceive a child. The room felt smaller. Daniel's ears rang as if something inside his head had snapped. He stared at the floor, then at his hands, half expecting them to shake. They didn't. His body stayed calm, even as his mind fractured. He thought of Emma standing in the kitchen, hopeful and trembling. He thought of the pregnancy test sliding across the table, 2 pink lines. He replayed the moment again, this time stripped of emotion, examined under the harsh light of fact. Impossible. The word finally made sense. As he signed the discharge papers, Daniel felt a strange sense of clarity settle over him. Grief flickered briefly, not for himself, but for the life he believed he was living. Whatever innocence remained in his marriage ended in that room. The truth had given him power, and power demanded patience. He told himself emotions were weaknesses, and weaknesses could wait. Daniel thanked the doctor, his voice steady, and walked out without asking questions. In the parking lot, he sat in his car with the engine off, staring through the windshield. Every memory of the past year began rearranging itself. Late nights, excuses, emotional distance, things he had dismissed now felt deliberate. Driving home, Daniel rehearsed nothing. No accusations, no questions, only observation. He would watch Emma closely, listen carefully, and let her reveal herself. Trust, he realized, was no longer blind. It was something to be tested, measured, and, if necessary, destroyed. When Daniel returned home, Emma was on the couch, pretending to watch television. She looked up, searching his face for answers he didn't give. He kissed her forehead lightly, a gesture so practiced it felt cruel. She smiled, relieved, unaware that the foundation beneath them had already collapsed. That night, Daniel lay awake beside her, listening to her breathing, counting the seconds between each rise and fall. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak. Inside his chest, love and betrayal tangled into something unrecognizable. Sleep never came easily. Each passing hour sharpened his resolve, transforming shock into certainty. Daniel understood that silence had protected their marriage once, but now it served a different purpose. It would hide his intentions until the moment he chose to speak, and act without mercy or hesitation ever. By morning, Daniel had reached a conclusion he could no longer avoid. The child Emma carried was real. The lie surrounding it was larger than he imagined, and somewhere outside their marriage, another man existed, one who held the truth Daniel was determined to uncover. Daniel began noticing patterns once he allowed himself to see them. Emma guarded her phone like a secret diary, turning the screen down, stepping into other rooms to answer messages. When asked who was calling, she smiled too quickly and said it was nothing. Daniel never pressed her. He didn't need to. Silence was more revealing than questions. Late one afternoon, Emma drove across town without explanation. Daniel followed at a distance, his hands steady on the wheel, his heartbeat calm in a way that frightened him. She parked outside an aging apartment complex he didn't recognize. The building looked ordinary, forgettable, exactly the kind of place secrets hid comfortably. Daniel watched as Emma hesitated before stepping out, as if weighing regret against obligation. A man opened the door before she knocked. Lucas Reed hadn't changed much. Daniel recognized him instantly from old photographs Emma once kept tucked away in a forgotten drawer. Lucas was part of her past, a name Daniel remembered from stories told early in their marriage, back when honesty came easily. Seeing him now felt like discovering a ghost had been living in the present all along. From his car, Daniel watched Emma step inside without touching Lucas, without smiling. The door closed quickly behind her. Minutes passed, then more. Daniel imagined conversations unfolding beyond those walls, imagined truths finally spoken aloud. He didn't feel anger yet, only confirmation. Inside the apartment, Emma stood rigid near the door. Lucas's voice was soft, cautious, as if approaching a wounded animal. He asked about her health, about the baby, about Daniel. Each question tightened the knot in her chest. She told him they couldn't keep meeting, that everything had gone too far. Lucas listened, jaw clenched, guilt etched into his expression. "You can't pretend this doesn't exist," he said quietly. "Neither can I." Emma's hands shook as she told him she was handling it, that Daniel didn't need to know anything. Lucas looked away, rubbing his face, torn between responsibility and fear. He hadn't asked for a child, but he knew the truth couldn't remain hidden forever. When Emma left, her face pale and drained, Daniel followed her home without being seen. He memorized Lucas's name from the mailbox, repeating it silently like a warning. The man from the past was no longer a memory. He was real, present, and connected to the lie growing inside Emma. That night, Daniel said nothing. He kissed Emma's cheek, poured himself a drink, and watched her closely. Emma sensed his attention, mistaking it for concern. She clung to the illusion that control was still hers, but control had already shifted. Daniel lay awake, replaying every detail of the afternoon. Lucas Reed, the apartment, the hesitation in Emma's steps. He understood now that the pregnancy was not an accident born of loneliness, but a consequence of choices made long before the test appeared. As the house settled into uneasy quiet, Daniel made a promise to himself. He would not confront Emma yet. He would let the lie grow heavy, unbearable, until it collapsed under its own weight. And when it did, everyone involved would face the truth, whether they were ready or not. In the days that followed, Daniel observed everything with new eyes. Every pause in Emma's speech, every forced laugh, every avoided glance became evidence. He noted when she mentioned work but returned smelling of unfamiliar cologne when her excuses arrived before his questions. Emma believed she was maintaining balance, but she was only deepening the fracture. Meanwhile, Lucas waited anxiously for messages that never came, unaware he was already part of a quiet investigation. The past had re-entered their lives not as nostalgia, but as a ticking threat, one that promised exposure, confrontation, and consequences, none of them fully understood yet. The calm before revelation stretched thin, pulling all three toward an unavoidable collision that none could escape unscathed. Emma decided that morning that truth was a luxury she could no longer afford. Confession promised destruction, not forgiveness, and she convinced herself that survival required discipline. Lies, when crafted carefully, could be controlled. Truth, once released, could not. She repeated this to herself while standing at the bathroom mirror, practicing expressions of calm that no longer came naturally. Daniel watched her quietly from the edges of the house. He noticed how her voice changed when she spoke about the future, how she spoke faster, as if racing ahead of consequences. When she mentioned doctor appointments, he nodded without question. When she avoided details, he accepted the gaps. His patience unsettled her more than anger ever could. Emma began rehearsing answers before questions were asked. She blamed hormones for her mood, exhaustion for her distance, fear for her tears. Each excuse layered over the last, forming something solid enough to stand on, at least temporarily. She told herself that once the baby arrived, everything would reset. Daniel would love the child, love would erase doubt, love would forgive, but love was not what Daniel was collecting. He was gathering inconsistencies, dates that shifted, stories that evolved. He listened closely, rarely interrupting, allowing Emma to talk herself into corners she didn't realize existed. At night, he lay beside her, staring into darkness, memorizing patterns, building timelines. Lucas grew impatient. His messages became more frequent, his tone sharper. He asked if Daniel knew, if there was a plan, if Emma expected him to disappear. She replied sparingly, choosing words that reassured without committing. She told him everything was under control, even as control slipped further from her grasp. One evening, Emma stayed late at work, or so she claimed. Daniel watched her location change on his phone, moving across town, stopping somewhere unfamiliar. He waited 10 minutes, then grabbed his keys. His pulse remained steady as he followed, maintaining distance, blending into traffic like instinct guided him. She parked outside Lucas's apartment again. This time Daniel didn't stay hidden. He watched from across the street as Emma entered, her shoulders slumped, her movements heavy with resignation. Minutes stretched into an hour. The building's windows revealed nothing, but Daniel felt certainty settle into his bones. Inside, Emma and Lucas argued in low voices. Lucas demanded honesty, Emma demanded patience. Neither offered solutions. When she finally left, her face was tight, eyes rimmed red, control barely intact. She didn't see Daniel as she drove away. Daniel followed her home slowly, deliberately. He memorized the route, the turns, the hesitation at lights. When she entered the house, he was already there, seated calmly, as if he had never left. Emma froze briefly before forcing a smile. "You're home early," she said. Daniel nodded. "So are you." She laughed too quickly, launching into explanations he didn't ask for. He listened, attentive, gentle, storing every word. Later, as she slept, Daniel accessed her phone while it charged beside the bed. Messages confirmed everything he already knew. The lie had a name, it had a face, it had a history. Daniel set the phone back carefully, exactly where it had been. He lay down beside her, eyes open, breathing controlled. Emma slept uneasily, murmuring fragments of dreams she couldn't remember. By morning, the lie was complete. Emma believed it could protect her. Lucas believed it would buy time. Daniel understood it was now strong enough to collapse catastrophically. And when that collapse came, Daniel would make sure it happened in the light, with no escape left for anyone involved. The house felt different after midnight, as if the walls themselves were listening. Daniel waited until the lights were off, until Emma's breathing slowed into something resembling sleep. He stood in the hallway, phone in his hand, screen dark, recording already armed. Silence, he believed, made people honest. He woke her gently, speaking her name without emotion. Emma startled, sitting up, eyes wide, instantly defensive. She asked what was wrong, why he looked like that, why he was standing so far away. Daniel closed the bedroom door behind him, the click echoing louder than it should have. "We need to talk," he said. Emma pulled the blanket closer, stalling for time. She smiled weakly, blamed nerves, blamed hormones. Daniel didn't sit. He paced slowly, methodically, choosing each word with care. He spoke about dates, appointments, and the way she vanished some evenings without explanation. Emma interrupted, denying, redirecting, accusing him of paranoia. Daniel stopped pacing. He asked one question quietly, "Is the baby mine?" The room seemed to lose air. Emma's mouth opened, then closed. She laughed once, too sharply, and said of course it was. She accused him of cruelty, of stress, of trying to punish her. Daniel listened without reacting, his face calm, his phone still hidden at his side. When he mentioned Lucas by name, Emma's composure cracked. Color drained from her face. She demanded to know how he knew, demanded privacy, demanded trust. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice, telling her he already knew everything. He said lies were heavier than truth, and he was tired of carrying them. Emma began to cry, real tears this time. She said it had meant nothing, that she'd been lonely, that Daniel had been absent. She said she was scared, that she didn't know how to fix it. Her words tumbled out, fragmented, emotional, desperate. Daniel felt something twist inside his chest, but he didn't stop her. "Tell me," he said softly. "Say it." Emma shook her head, sobbing, insisting she loved him. She begged him not to make her say it out loud, as if silence could still protect her. Daniel waited. The darkness pressed in, forcing the moment forward. Finally, she whispered the truth. The baby wasn't his. It never could be. The words barely reached the air before collapsing into sobs. Daniel stood perfectly still, letting the confession settle, letting the recording capture every syllable. When she realized what she had done, Emma froze. She followed Daniel's gaze to the faint glow of the phone screen. Understanding dawned slowly, painfully. She begged him to stop, to delete it, to talk like adults. Daniel turned off the recording without answering. He told her this conversation was over, that they would both sleep, that tomorrow they would decide what came next. His voice was calm, terrifyingly controlled. Emma watched him leave the room, her body shaking, mind racing toward consequences she could no longer outrun. Alone in the hallway, Daniel listened to her crying through the door. He didn't feel relief. He felt resolve. The truth was finally his, preserved, undeniable, and now that it existed, it demanded action. He slipped the phone into his pocket and washed his hands in the kitchen sink, scrubbing as if guilt were visible. Dawn crept closer, thin and gray. Daniel planned nothing aloud, but steps aligned in his mind. He would verify, preserve, and confront again when leverage mattered most. Emma, locked in the bedroom, rocked and counted breaths, sensing the ground giving way. Neither slept. Somewhere across town, another man woke to unanswered messages, unaware that patience had expired. By sunrise, Daniel would begin turning suspicion into proof and silence into a weapon. The night recorded everything, and consequences followed without mercy. Morning arrived without relief. Daniel moved through the house with deliberate calm, preparing coffee, reading news, behaving like a man who had slept. Emma watched him from the doorway, hollow-eyed, hands folded over her stomach, waiting for accusation that never came. His silence pressed harder than any threat. Days followed in a strained routine. Daniel asked practical questions, scheduled appointments, discussed finances, all without emotion. Emma answered carefully, measuring every word, afraid the wrong tone might detonate something irreversible. At night, Daniel slept lightly, phone beneath his pillow, while Emma stared into darkness, rehearsing explanations for a future that felt increasingly fictional. Lucas stopped waiting. He showed up outside Emma's workplace, pale and restless, demanding answers she could not give. Their conversation was brief and tense, conducted in hushed voices near the parking lot. He wanted acknowledgement, a plan, a role. Emma wanted disappearance. She told him to leave her alone, then watched panic replace patience in his eyes. Pressure closed in from every direction. Emma's body changed, nausea worsening, sleep evaporating. She felt trapped between two men, neither offering safety. Guilt turned inward, becoming self. Loathing, then fear. She imagined headlines, courtrooms, strangers judging her choices. The weight became unbearable. Daniel noticed the shift. Emma jumped at sounds, flinched when touched, avoided mirrors. He asked if she was okay, voice neutral. She nodded too quickly. That night, an argument erupted over nothing, words sharp and reckless. Daniel accused her of lying again. Emma screamed that he was controlling her, punishing her, suffocating her. The shouting carried through the walls. A neighbor paused outside, listening, phone in hand. Inside, Emma grabbed her keys, threatening to leave. Daniel blocked the door, not touching her, standing firm, eyes cold. He told her running would only make things worse. His certainty terrified her more than anger. Something broke. Emma shoved past him, tears blinding, heart racing. Daniel followed to the driveway, calling her name, warning her to stop. She slipped on the steps, falling hard, pain tearing through her side. For a moment, everything went silent. The neighbor dialed emergency services. Daniel stood frozen, staring at Emma curled on the concrete, blood spreading beneath her. She looked up at him, shock and betrayal mixing with fear. Sirens sounded faintly in the distance, growing louder. Paramedics were still minutes away, and those minutes stretched cruelly. Daniel's mind raced through options, consequences, narratives. He remembered the recording, the messages, the certainty he carried like armor. He told himself he had warned her that chaos was not his doing. Emma gasped, clutching her side, whispering apologies and accusations in the same breath. Daniel pressed his jacket beneath her head, performing care while calculating outcomes. The neighbor hovered, asking questions. Daniel answered calmly, almost politely. Someone across the street filmed on a phone. Shame flickered, then vanished. Daniel focused on control. He urged Emma to stay awake, to breathe, to listen to his voice. She asked if the baby was okay. Daniel didn't answer. The silence returned, thick and punishing. In that space, Emma understood that mercy was not coming, only procedure. Tires screeched nearby, doors slammed, the street filled with witnesses and authority. Daniel stood, hands visible, face composed. He felt the night closing, sealing decisions already made. Whatever happened next would be documented, dissected, argued. The story had escaped them. It belonged to everyone now. Consequences gathered quietly, patient and relentless, waiting to assign blame, redefine love, and transform private failure into public tragedy before the sun rose for everyone involved, without mercy or chance of return ever again. As lights approached, Daniel knelt beside her, whispering that everything would be okay, that he would fix this. Emma tried to speak, then screamed. The truth, the lies, the child, all collided in that moment. And as red and blue lights flooded the street, Daniel realized the breaking point had arrived and nothing could stop what followed. Sirens cut through the street, sharp and urgent, turning neighbors into witnesses. Red and blue light washed over the house, over Emma's face, over Daniel's steady hands. Paramedics moved quickly, voices calm, steps practiced, as if rehearsed for exactly this moment. Emma screamed as they lifted her, pain and fear spilling together. Daniel stayed close, answering questions, repeating facts, offering control where chaos tried to take over. He said it was an accident, a fall, a terrible misunderstanding. His voice never shook. At the hospital, hours blurred into a single waiting room smell of disinfectant and dread. Daniel sat alone while doctors worked behind closed doors. He replayed the night, trimming it into something survivable. When a nurse finally spoke, her words were careful and incomplete. Emma was stable. The baby's condition was uncertain. Daniel nodded, thanked her, and returned to the waiting chair. Relief did not arrive. Across town, Lucas read the missed calls and felt the floor drop away. He drove toward the hospital, rehearsing apologies he would never deliver. Before he arrived, police tape appeared outside Daniel's house. A neighbor had spoken. A phone video existed. Questions multiplied. Detectives entered the story without asking permission. They cataloged times, statements, and the quiet precision of Daniel's account. Daniel provided what he chose, nothing more. Emma slept under observation, waking to pain and panic. She asked for Daniel. He came, held her hand, and spoke softly about fixing things. She searched his face for warmth and found procedure. By midnight, the house was a crime scene. Blood stained the steps, evidence without context. No one could yet say who caused what. Daniel returned home briefly with an officer, pointing, explaining, consenting. He noticed the pregnancy test drawer still closed. Control remained intact. At dawn, detectives requested Daniel's phone. He handed it over, expression neutral. Somewhere inside the device lived a confession, quiet and devastating. The night had ended, but its reach had not. As evidence began to speak, the truth prepared to choose sides. In the hospital corridor, Emma overheard fragments of police radios and understood the shape of what was coming. Her chest tightened with a certainty she could not name. She asked a nurse for water, then for privacy, then for forgiveness. None arrived. Outside, cameras gathered like insects, drawn to light and rumor. Daniel watched them from a distance, calculating angles and outcomes. He believed preparation could still outrun consequence. Across the city, Lucas reached the hospital doors and was turned away. His name did not belong on any list. He sat in his car, hands shaking, finally understanding silence as threat. Back inside, a detective noted inconsistencies and scheduled follow-up. Daniel agreed, polite, cooperative, rehearsed. The night released them into morning with nothing resolved. Emma slept again, medicated, dreaming of falling. Daniel drove away as the sun rose, already shaping tomorrow. Behind him, the steps waited, stained and silent. Ahead, investigators waited, patient and thorough. The story was no longer theirs to control. What came next would decide who survived the truth. As files opened and timelines aligned, the night's echoes hardened into evidence. Every choice would be weighed, every silence interpreted. Daniel understood this and welcomed the arena. Emma sensed it too, though from a hospital bed, powerless. The night had ended lives as they knew them. Morning would begin the accounting. Detectives prepared warrants, interviews, and the slow grind of certainty. Phones would speak, walls would remember, and somewhere between guilt and grief, a verdict would form. The night everything ended had only just begun telling the truth. It would not be gentle. It would be precise. And it would demand names. When daylight finally settled, no clear victim could be named yet. Only blood, records, and the promise of answers. The investigation was awake now, and it would not sleep. Not tonight, not ever again. Morning brought investigators, notebooks open, patience intact. Detectives moved room to room, photographing stains, measuring distances, collecting fragments of a story that resisted simplicity. Neighbors repeated screams and silence. A video surfaced, shaky but damning. The house yielded timelines, not motives, and certainty waited elsewhere. Proof gathered slowly that day. Digital forensics spoke first. Emma's messages mapped secret routes, meetings, reassurances. Lucas's name appeared repeatedly, threaded with urgency and fear. Dates aligned with clinic visits and absences. Daniel's recording emerged, clean and undeniable, capturing confession and panic. Evidence transformed suspicion into architecture, sturdy enough to stand scrutiny, under oath. Later, medical reports followed. Daniel's infertility diagnosis removed ambiguity, turning probability into fact. Obstetric records confirmed conception windows incompatible with marriage. Doctors testified calmly, detached from consequence. Biology carried no malice, only truth. The unborn child became a ledger entry, central and silent, shaping charges without voice or consent. For everyone, witness statements complicated matters. A neighbor described shouting, obstruction, a fall. Another mentioned Daniel's composure, unsettlingly precise. Timelines conflicted, then converged. Police reconstructed movements minute by minute, stripping emotion from narrative. What remained was sequence, opportunity, and a narrowing field of explanations that excluded accidents and excuses beyond doubt. Now, Emma listened from a hospital bed as lawyers spoke softly nearby. Each fact landed heavier than pain. She realized confession had not ended things, it had begun them. Shame curdled into fear. The truth no longer belonged to her. It belonged to files, exhibits, and strangers rehearsing conclusions, daily, publicly. Daniel reviewed discovery with measured interest. He corrected small errors, offered clarifications, and withheld reaction. Control, he believed, remained possible through preparation. He framed events as inevitability, not intent. Yet evidence is indifferent to posture. It accumulates, aligns, and speaks when silence expects loyalty. Courts listen eventually without mercy. Here, across town, Lucas surrendered his phone, voice cracking. He confirmed meetings, denied violence, accepted paternity. His cooperation accelerated momentum. Prosecutors saw leverage. Detectives saw completion. The triangle collapsed into lines of responsibility. Each man's choices sharpened the outline, leaving fewer shadows to hide within, for anyone, ever again. Anywhere nearby, charges took shape as binders thickened. Assault, obstruction, falsification competed for precedence. Intent hovered, debated, and defined. Investigators prepared summaries that read like fate. The case no longer asked what happened. It asked who would answer for it and at what cost. Soon, publicly, decisively, in courtrooms ahead, nationwide, watching, the evidence changed how Emma saw Daniel. His calm became threat, his care a method. She requested counsel, then solitude. In the quiet, she counted consequences and felt the child move. Truth had momentum. It pressed forward, unconcerned with regret, carrying everyone toward judgment. Without pause, relentlessly by design, now, as investigators closed files, they opened futures. Court dates loomed, media waited, families braced. The evidence had revealed more than guilt. It revealed cost. The next chapter would test justice itself, demanding testimony, verdicts, and consequences that would echo long after birth, for all involved, without relief or mercy. Ahead, with warrants drafted, detectives scheduled interviews. Emma's recovery ended. Daniel's preparation began. Lucas awaited summons. The record stood complete. What followed would be public, adversarial, irreversible. Evidence had spoken. Now the courtroom would answer, deciding blame, punishment, and the price of truth. For everyone watching closely, from this moment onward, prosecutors organized exhibits, labeling moments, motives, means. Defense planned challenges, emphasizing ambiguity and procedure. Sides hardened. The case acquired a name. Schedules fixed reality. Everyone waited for court to convert evidence into story, and story into judgment, with consequences measured in years. Ahead lay testimony, under oath soon. Public scrutiny. Night returned quietly as files traveled downtown. Emma rested uneasily. Daniel rehearsed lines. Lucas prayed for mercy. The investigation closed its mouth and opened its hands. Tomorrow would begin the trial phase, where facts harden, voices fracture, and outcomes become permanent. The next chapter waits, with judgment approaching. At last, the courthouse loomed, sterile and intimidating, reflecting the gravity of what had transpired. Daniel arrived first, his suit precise, movements controlled, hands calm though thoughts raced like storm currents beneath the surface. Every step to the courtroom was measured, rehearsed, a ritual of preparation and patience. He carried the evidence, the recording, the documentation, each piece a silent accusation in his possession. Emma followed, supported by counsel, fragile and pale. Hospitalization had left her drained, and the courtroom lights revealed the toll. Her eyes darted constantly, searching the benches, the gallery, even her lawyer, for reassurance. Every whispered instruction was swallowed in a tide of fear. The truth, once private and hidden, now echoed loudly against the cold walls. Lucas arrived last, nervous, understated, holding himself small in a space that demanded presence. He had no strategy beyond honesty, yet honesty carried weight, sometimes heavier than lies. The judge's gavel punctuated the beginning of proceedings, and the courtroom seemed to contract around the three central figures, forcing them to confront reality without distraction or escape. Opening statements painted the narrative with precision. Prosecutors spoke of betrayal, deception, manipulation, and fear. Defense countered with emotional context, arguing miscommunication, isolation, and impulsive decisions. The jury listened, eyes focused, absorbing each word as if it were a verdict already in motion. Witnesses appeared, giving timelines, recounting messages, and describing altered behavior. Each account layered truth upon suspicion, forming a mosaic too complex for simple resolution. Daniel sat silently, letting statements wash over him. He noted reactions, Emma's flinch at a familiar date, Lucas's tightened jaw, the subtle glance toward the recording he had preserved. Every observation became evidence of intent, every hesitation an admission. Emotion mattered less than pattern, and Daniel was meticulous in cataloging both for himself and for the courtroom. When Emma testified, her voice wavered. She recounted moments with honesty fractured by fear, detailing interactions, choices, and regrets. The jury absorbed both confession and denial. Her story was not linear. It twisted, paused, and faltered. Each pause became a spotlight, revealing emotional truth even when words obscured full clarity. Daniel listened, restrained, yet internally counting inconsistencies and confirmations. Lucas testified next, corroborating dates, affirming presence, acknowledging paternity without embellishment. His testimony bridged gaps, confirming patterns Daniel had already mapped. The lawyers questioned, redirected, pressed. Silence fell between each exchange, magnifying every detail. The courtroom seemed suspended, poised on the edge of revelation. Closing arguments escalated tension. Prosecutors argued consequence, damage, responsibility. Defense argued motive, circumstance, and human error. Words collided with memory, emotion, and evidence. Every spectator leaned forward, sensing the gravity, knowing that judgment would extend beyond law into morality and conscience. Daniel remained calm, yet inside he calculated outcomes, anticipating testimony, predicting reactions, and weighing possibilities. When the judge prepared instructions for the jury, the tension reached its peak. Emma's face reflected exhaustion and anticipation. Lucas's hands trembled slightly. Daniel's eyes remained fixed, unwavering. The verdict would determine futures, accountability, and the cost of deception. Each participant understood the weight of silence and speech alike. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered, phones poised, waiting for public statements. Inside, every word had consequences, and every pause was interpreted as strategy or guilt. The three central figures moved carefully, emotionally exhausted, aware that the truth, fractured and multifaceted, would soon be distilled into finality. The next moment would test resilience, morality, and the enduring impact of lies. And when the jury returned, no one would leave unchanged. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving echoes in its wake. Daniel walked out with measured steps, the verdict delivered, but the consequences unfolding like shadows in sunlight. The jury's decision had carved reality into permanent shapes, guilt assigned, blame apportioned, and a fragile child caught in the aftermath. He felt relief, yes, but also a hollow weight pressing against his chest. Justice had been served, but at what cost? Emma remained under observation, fragile and pale, every movement reminding her of choices made in fear and secrecy. Her hands, once used to soothing, cleaning, and hiding, now trembled with the awareness that lies could no longer shield her. She thought of the child, the life growing within her, and wondered what innocence had been lost in a web of deception. Guilt clung to her, heavier than any hospital gown. Lucas waited outside the courthouse, silent, grappling with his own role in the tragedy. Cooperation had spared him harsher consequences, but moral weight could not be negotiated. He remembered conversations, whispered promises, moments when honesty could have changed everything. Now his responsibility existed as a permanent shadow, stretching across everyone connected to that night. The media circled, capturing fragments and angles, their presence forcing private grief into public spectacle. Daniel refused interviews, maintaining composure as reporters pressed for sound bites. He allowed the truth to speak quietly through official channels. believing that control could still be maintained even as lives fractured around him. Emma's and Lucas's stories would follow separate trajectories, each shaped by perception, narrative, and consequence. Back at home, Daniel unpacked the quiet, walking through rooms that once held comfort and laughter. He touched objects absent-mindedly, remembering moments of hope, betrayal, and denial. The house was unchanged, yet everything within it had shifted irrevocably. He understood that control was never truly his. It had always been an illusion, fragile and fleeting. Yet he also knew that careful observation had preserved what truth could be found. Emma reflected on her decisions in the solitude of her hospital room. Each lie had been a shield, each omission a strategy, but shields can break, strategies can fail. She realized now that the child, the relationships, the trust she had hoped to preserve were all casualties of avoidance. Fear had dictated choices, and fear had multiplied consequences. She understood that accountability was not only legal but moral, stretching beyond courtrooms into the lives that would carry memory, scars, and story forward. Daniel considered the future, the child, the household, and the fragile remnants of relationships. He understood that truth could never undo the past, but it could inform action, boundaries, and responsibility moving forward. Silence had protected nothing. Revelation had consequences. He resolved to navigate this world with clarity, vigilance, and measured trust, recognizing that deception had cost more than anyone could ever calculate. The baby's life, innocent yet entangled, became the symbol of all that had been lost and all that remained. Emma and Daniel both knew that responsibility now outweighed emotion, that planning, protection, and truth would define the next chapters of existence. Even love, fragile and tentative, required honesty to survive. As the sun set, casting long shadows through hospital corridors and empty homes, the lingering cost of lies hung heavy. Each character faced the reality of choices made, words spoken, and silences kept. Justice, measured and impartial, had drawn lines between guilt and consequence. Yet the emotional toll, invisible and unquantifiable, would remain, shaping futures, memories, and decisions indefinitely. In the quiet that followed, only one truth remained unshakable. Lies may protect for a moment, deceive for hours, even manipulate for days. But ultimately, the cost is paid in full, with interest, across every life they touch. And sometimes, that cost is the only legacy left behind.